Good morning, everyone. I would like to first of all thank everyone who's joining us from India on a Saturday morning. I really appreciate your time that you're giving to us on a weekend. My name is Kshitij, and I'm the Managing Director of Estero New Zealand. We are an Education New Zealand recognized organization that helps students and professionals to build a rewarding career in New Zealand. I would like to welcome all of you to today's panel discussion with our distinguished panelists, our educators from New Zealand representing universities ranked among the world's best. The pandemic has greatly challenged the academics, especially the teachers who have shown greater leadership and innovation in ensuring that a student's learning never stops. As per UNESCO, when COVID was at its most active stage, 91% of learners, which is approximately 1.5 billion students, had to face the challenge of school closure. It is then that the people realized that the schools and academic institutions are more than just a place of learning. It is a place that nurtures young minds, a place that fuels friendships, and a place that builds an ecosystem of mutual respect and communication. At the center stage of all this disruption have been the teachers who have shown greater resilience to ensure no student is left behind. And today, I would personally like to acknowledge the challenges that the academics have faced while supporting students to learn in a virtual environment. While COVID-19 disrupted learning at an unprecedented scale and severity, the pandemic led institutions globally to set up collaborations, integrate technology, and transform institutions towards being more inclusive, safe, and sustainable. I would like to thank all the teachers without whom our young minds would have dealt with a learning gap that would have affected their respective academic journey in the long run. Thank you. Moving to our panelists, we have with us today Professor Don Klinger from the University of Waikato, Dr. Marion Tan from Massey University, Ms. Irina Hunt from University of Otago, and Mr. Ashish Dogra from an academy. I would like to introduce each one of you, and you can share your opening statements. Professor Don Klinger is the Pro Vice Chancellor at the Division of Education, the University of Waikato. His research interest focuses on the formative and summative methods used to measure student outcomes and the resulting decisions and actions made. Don's contributions are highly valued due to both his psychometric skills and his understanding of policy and the integration of assessment within the varied context. I welcome you to today's panel discussion, Don.
Oh, good morning and thank you. And as you'll quickly realize, I'm not from New Zealand originally. I'm actually from Canada. And in Canada, before I started my academic career, I was a chemistry teacher. And so that's where my background comes in. And I taught chemistry and worked with students in schools on issues of assessment and formative learning, formative assessment. So that's my early background. But what I will talk about is just some of the work that we've done. And I actually became interested in online learning long before COVID-19 hit, albeit it was in a higher education setting. I led a team who developed a fully online master's program, and it's become very popular at my former university. And among other opportunities, we'd seen a growing desire at the time from students to have greater flexibility in their learning. So they were actually looking for different ways of engaging in their learning rather than the face-to-face systems. And I have to be honest, I was a skeptic at that time. This is in 2015, and I was quite a skeptic of it. But there was a conversation I had with a student, and we were in this online panel. We were trying to work on what it would look like. And the student said to me, he said, "This is the first time when I'm in an online verse, the first time I feel I can ask my teacher questions. I've never had that opportunity before." And he felt he had a voice in his learning and finally had the time to think more about the questions that he was asked before he could give a response. So for him, the online environment was a real freeing experience. As you'll see from the panelists today, we have a lot of experience with online learning in New Zealand, and much of it was long before COVID. Of course, COVID has made us think about online learning across the years and context, as we've all seen. And that's created really some new challenges and opportunities. But I do believe that some of our previous learning continues to provide important insights for our topic today. And some of the things I'm about to say, I think you probably already experienced and know about, but I think it's important to, as a starting point, things that I think are really fundamental to good communication and teaching and learning in an online form. And first, I'm sure you've experienced this, but teaching and learning online is different than teaching face-to-face. I think you need much less focus on teacher talk and a lot greater use of discussion boards and other virtual forms of students coming together to learn. What that's resulted in is much more student-directed learning, helping students become much more focused on that. I found a real power in virtual breakout rooms. And again, I used to do this in the classroom, not in the virtual system. And as I said, my own background is in classroom assessment. And that was because as a teacher, I was always more interested in minimizing the work that I did and maximizing the work that students did. So I always put the students in charge of trying to direct their learning. And they formed groups together, they worked on problems together. And the less I did, the more they learned. And the more they, I'll talk about later, what I call instructional dialogues and learning dialogues, the more they engaged in that, the more effective their learning was. So for me, part of the effectiveness of good communication, whether it be online or face-to-face, is getting the students to do more of it. And with that, I'll leave it to the next panelist.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah,
turn on the mic.
Virtual learning. I would like to introduce Dr. Marion now, who's a postdoc fellow at the Joint Center for Research at Massey University. She has expertise in the use of technology for disaster management with current research interests in user engagement and citizen science. She plays an active role in education and outreach activities for Massey University. Welcome to today's session, Dr. Marion.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be in this platform, and I guess with most everyone, we're using an online platform to do this. So I'm sure everyone has experience. But first of all, I just really want to greet everyone. Belated Happy Teachers Day, and really we're here together because of the incredible work that everyone's doing, and just want to acknowledge that. So my background is I'm from the Joint Center for Disaster Research, and we really research disasters. And what's my role in this conversation that we will have today? Because my research as a postdoc is looking at how we use technology to engage in crisis situations. So actually, we use technology to engage people. In my past research, I've looked at how usability, user experience help us engage with the audience, with users, not just students, but let's say in the context of crisis and disasters. If you send out an alert, a message, how can we best maximize and optimize this message that we're putting through so that people would take action and people would actually do what you want them to do? And if we expand this a little bit, we can put this in the classroom setting. How can we use the tools that we have? You know, like we're using Zoom at the moment, and I'm sure everyone else here has a range of tools that they're using for technology. And how do we use that to engage our students? It's really, really challenging. As Don said, you know, in this online environment, it's not the same as the classroom. And we're kind of flipping the classroom a little bit. We're giving more chance for the students to do their own learning. And how do we facilitate that? So here, my conversation and the things that I would talk about maybe later is how do we use these tools, these technology that we have, and perhaps I can take on some of the experience that we use in the disaster or crisis setting. And I think we're all in a crisis at the moment with this pandemic, right? But we're making the best out of it, and we have the best tools to really thrive in this scenario. I guess one example that I will really want to put here is that technology is here, but we shouldn't be limited with technology. We've worked so hard as teachers and educators before, and we have the tools. It's just really finding how to fit together. So one of the things that we've done here at Massey University, we had this what we call a crisis lab challenge. So it's a crisis laboratory challenge, and we had this engagement with the students, and we have the competition with them. You know, in New Zealand, we were very fortunate that we didn't have strict lockdowns. So we started face-to-face. Then suddenly the Delta variant came, and then we had disruptions with lockdowns and everything, but we had to continue the program. So we had to use these tools to engage the students. So I think we can all relate to this experience of disruptions. But my key takeaway with this thing that we did is that, I teach technology and how we use technology and coding, and that's what we do with the kids. But one of the really beautiful moment is that we ask the kids to do something analog, something that's not digital. And then that got them really engaged, for them to actually do something outside the computer. And then we come together and then we chat about these things that they've done outside, outside their computer, and something that more physical, hands-on. And that got them really excited. So there are definitely tools, both digital, analog, and tools that we've learned before the pandemic, and tools that we've adapted now that we are in this kind of situation, the pandemic. And I'm sure everyone in this kind of the 150 participants here have their own, you're equipped. And I just really want to thank everyone for their work and continuing their, teaching and educating our young people. So I think I'll stop there and pass on to Arina.
Thank you, Marion, and I'm sure your experience and your research that you have done in the field of disaster management alongside technology will help a lot of our teachers today on what are the best practices that we can follow to support our students. Moving on to Arina, who is a senior teacher and has been teaching students offshore and online for years. Arina is an experienced English language lecturer with a demonstrated history of working in the higher education industry. She is skilled in intercultural communication, English as a second language, lecturing, teacher training, and curriculum development. She is currently managing and developing the ESL content curriculum for online blended learning programs. I welcome you to today's panel discussion, Arina.
Kia ora and tēnā koutou katoa. And a belated International Teachers' Day greetings to everybody. It's been an exceedingly challenging time and a huge paradigm shift in the way we deliver education. And delivering in this different mode has been different for each and every one of us as teachers, and also for each and every one of our learners. Every one of them and every one of us has their own narrative, and no two stories are the same. So it's been very challenging times. So hopefully today we can dig deeper into that and share what we have learned, what we've reflected on, what we want to learn, and see where we go from here. My career before I became a teacher was in journalism, and I've always loved words and language. But after having a family, I became a teacher specializing in ESOL, a job I love and have been working in for 28 years now at the University of Otago English Language Centre, and offshore in China, Thailand, Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. A lot of Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, not India, though I have visited and traveled from Kashmir to Tamil Nadu and loved that too. My master's thesis was in project-based learning and collaborative teaching and learning. And in recent years, I've been developing asynchronous content for online learning. This happened pre-COVID, so we were fortunate to have piloted some programs through Otago prior to our lockdown situation. So we almost had this ready model that as English language instructors we could take and use. We have worked closely with Japan in telecollaborative curriculum development and learning. So students in real time, when we had students in the classroom in New Zealand and in a partner institution in Japan, would be working together on collaborative projects, and that was highly successful. I've developed curriculum for blended language programs for general English, from elementary levels right through to advanced, academic IELTS, teacher training as well. And currently we're teaching English for mathematics and English for science, mostly at secondary level. And of course, since this began in 2018, 2019, the way that we deliver and the platforms that we can use have evolved so rapidly. So we really have to keep a pace of these changes and integrate them into our programs as they become freely available. So it's a big learning curve for everybody. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what I can learn today as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Irina. Last but not the least, we have Mr. Ashish with us. Ashish is a very well-known face in the virtual learning environment. He has a strong background as an academic and as an edupreneur. Ashish is an alumnus of Indian Institute of Technology, a motivational speaker, an AI enthusiast who has mentored students of Unacademy for 170 plus in NEET 2020. He is a pro when it comes to teaching virtually. Ashish will be the one moderating the session today. And before I pass the baton on to him to lead the session and introduce himself, please allow me to briefly inform you on how the session would be run today. Our panelists will be answering a set of questions which we have collected from the attending audience at the time of registration. The teachers attending the session today can post their questions during the session in the Q&A box, and we will answer these towards the final part of the session. If any participating academic would like to interact with our panelists, please put your hand up in the Zoom tab, and we will allow you to enable your camera and microphone to ask your question directly. Ashish, passing this on to you. Please introduce yourself and take this forward for us.
Thank you. So my name is Ashish and I hail from northern side of India. It's called Kashmir. I think many people know a lot about it due to political reasons, I think. But right from the beginning, right from the very start, in my childhood, I used to watch Cosmos. I used to follow Carl Sagan. I used to follow Neil deGrasse Tyson, and who were really great educators, who were really great, people who inspired students, inspired me actually. So I always felt there is a need for intellectuals who would guide students, who would engage students in a meaningful conversation about science. And it is required in every region, not just in Western world. It is required, like in India also, we need people like these. We need people like Carl Sagan who would engage students in a meaningful way. Students should look up to them, right? Okay, they want to. I had a dream. I watched a movie called Swadesh. It's the lead actor is Shah Rukh Khan, who is actually a very famous Bollywood actor. And the movie that I watched, it was about a scientist who was working in NASA and who came to India and found out that there is no electricity in his village. And then he, started working on it, and he did his engineering, and he created a very powerful dam. And then he created electricity, and then everything just became like a typical Indian movie. It became so exciting. So I started loving science. I started loving these icons, and that drove me towards my college, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and then also drove me towards teaching kids. In my experience of past 1.5 years, I have experimented with various strategies to teach students online. 1.5 years of online education. The way I found best to communicate is by following 3 steps. First is empathy-driven conversations. Like, learners can embrace you and open up with you if they think you understand their pain points. If they think you're out there to deliver some static content, like we usually do, they are wired to detect that, right? And the second point should be that we use tech tools to enhance the experience. Tools can be used to create assignments, grading learners, and making sure all monotonous work can be automated. But we need to also look at experience from learners' perspective. Sometimes they are forced to join too many clubs, too many groups, too many chat sessions that sometimes becomes jarring for them. And the third point I want to make is to just keep it real. sometimes what we do is we just try to emulate some iconic personality, and we just we try to so much avoid the errors. So it doesn't feel like real. It doesn't feel like a physical classroom. So we need to keep it real. In my opinion, learners should show more engagement if classroom is guided by impromptu conversations, when we sometimes do move to ideas and topics which are difficult to plan ahead of time, do lead to interesting conclusions. So with that in mind, with that opening remark, I should open this discussion. And I would start this by, I think, asking few simple questions, very minute questions, I think, and then we'll target the bigger questions after that. So let's start with Professor Don. My first question would be, sir, that has virtual learning pushed teachers to be entertainers? Do you think so?
I guess I'll start. I don't believe teachers should ever be entertainers per se. I believe teachers should be engaging, and I think they should create engaging opportunities. And I do think, as you were mentioning, Ashish, I think there's been some brilliant, we're both science teachers. There's been some brilliant television and lecturers in the past, and I think there's a way of teachers turning students towards those things to do that. So, so it's not that teachers need to be entertainers, but I think we do need to find ways to engage. So I tried, I think our personalities come out as teachers, but I think we have to be careful of not falling into the entertainment trap as opposed to the learning goals.
So my next question is to Dr. Tan, Marion Tan. So my question, for example, we have witnessed a phenomenal increase in technology in education, right? So a question, obviously arises that can technology be double-edged? How can technology be beneficial or detrimental to engagement? And what strategies can be used to optimize technology for engagement? If you please could answer that. Yeah.
Thanks, Ashish. And I think this relates to what you said earlier. Like sometimes we have, too many platforms for students to use. There's some virtual classrooms, there's Zoom, there's chat boxes, so WhatsApp or whatever, have used Slack and any of these platforms. And it can be double-edged. And the thing is, one thing that we've learned from in disaster technologies, we never want to overburden the users or overburden our students, that you give them too much that they can't learn, because each of these platforms that we use, they would need to learn, they need to experience, and there's you don't want to really burn out from just learning how to use Zoom, how to use the chat box, how to use the Q&A. And that's for me the double edge of using technology. Sometimes I think teachers might be a bit pressured to learn all of these tools and make sure, I need to use this in the classroom, I need to use Mural, I need to use Google Docs or whatever. But the thing is I think the good thing is technology, that it's here, but we have to look for ways that work for us as educators and what works for the students as well. And I'm sure there's different access as well for students, and that's what we need to think about. Sometimes we need to simplify, maybe choose two to three tools that works best. So for example, we're using Zoom at the moment. Zoom has already a lot of functionality, and what I try to encourage technology users is to look at this piece of technology and how can we find the best tools to make use of it. So for example, if I'm using Zoom in a virtual classroom, I'd use the chat box. Like if I'm hosting a smaller webinar than this, let's say if there's 30 participants, I can't get all of the 30 participants to introduce themselves. That's going to take the entire hour. But you can use the chat box to say, as everyone in this webinar has done, is to introduce themselves, say where they're from, and then there can be those interactions. So I guess what's one thing that's taken out from the physical classroom is this limited interaction. So yeah, use the tools that you have, maybe choose one or two more. But you have to think, that students, they have your class, then they go to the next teacher, and maybe they have another set of tools. And there's just too much sometimes. But yeah, so we're very fortunate that we have these technological tools to enhance our learning. And I think you're very spot on, Ashish. It's really, use these tools to enhance the experience. Don't use it because you have to, but, like find what works for you and find what works for your students. And then that ties back to your first point, is empathy. So we really connecting to your students, see what works for them, and mutually for you too. And I like the last one, is keep it real. I think especially in this virtual room, because we don't have this physical interaction, is if the students see that you're human, I think that creates a little bit more, it enhances the interaction. Yeah, so that's my kind of thoughts about technology. And it's the same whether it's in the classroom or whether we're using it for communicating really crisis information. These are some of the key things that we have to think about. Don't overburden, and use what works. Simple, maybe better sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you, Marian. So yeah, we do tend to sometimes, entirely replace educators from the process, and we use tools which, sometimes overwhelm educators also. I whenever I search for something, some tool like online board, and there are like n number of options, and I generally get confused because there is a psychological barrier that, okay, there might be some 1% chance that this one is better, and then I have to look the documentation. It's challenging for me too for these processes. So my next question would be to um, uh, Arena Hunt. There are plenty of softwares and tools available for educators online, right? We have discussed this. What do you think? What support tools and platforms can be accessed easily to enhance learning and develop community in this different development mode? Like,
Okay, sorry, I have my mute on, but I was laughing because I think Marian, this segued really nicely from what Marian just said. There are so many intimidating tools and platforms to use. And when we first were designing our asynchronous portion of our blended learning online program, we tried to source what we thought was the best platform for student asynchronous learning. And we found a platform called Kura Cloud, which in Te Reo Maori, which is the New Zealand, one of the 3 languages of New Zealand, means school, cloud in the school, kura meaning school. And this was a not commonly used platform throughout the world, but has enabled us to deliver what we really want to deliver. But it had pitfalls. And I'm giving you this example because this is something that is close to my heart, because this is how we tried to design a program from nothing to something. And what we found with this platform was, with English language learning, of course, you want to try and cover all integrated skills. And it was great for automated grading for things like listening and reading, where there were right and wrong answers and what have you. But there was no real access for the students to be able to upload recordings for themselves, or for there to be any writing grading. So we had to then try and superimpose something else into that platform so that the students could do speaking tasks and for the asynchronous portion. And Padlet was the best option that we sourced for that. They could upload video files, they could upload audio files, they could just use text, they could use animation. There was a whole host of things that they could use quite simply. But because there are such a vast range of tools, and I mean, I'm thinking of things like goodness me, even simple tools like Mentimeter or oh goodness, they're all escaping my mind at the moment, but Kahoot, for example, those things can all be injected into a online virtual classroom. It's quite simply, not the asynchronous, but the online Zoom classroom, they can be used. And there is such a wealth, and it's quite daunting as a teacher to try and get your head around or wrap around how to use each one of these platforms. And then of course they go and say, okay, it's free, it's free, it's free. And then they turn around and 2 months later, suddenly you need a license for that. But yeah, my response to that is support tools and platforms. I actually have a database of, which I don't have readily with me now, but a database that I'm quite happy to send all participants after this the seminar and share widely, because it's taken some time to get that together, but it will provide a host, hundreds of tools that can be used virtually.
Thank you, Irina. So of course, we'll be using those tools which you'll recommend. And I'm sure that you took quite a lot of time to arrange all those tools together. And finding out the best possible combination of tools is also very tricky. And educator knows how to, sometimes we are looking at the camera and sometimes the red button is not working. Sometimes the text is not working, and it's very daunting sometimes. Let me come back to Professor Dawn, and I'd like to ask him that, as we know, peer assessments is a crucial element in classroom settings, and it enhances the overall experience of learning, right? So what strategies work, in your opinion, to help students engage in peer assessment while learning online?
Yeah, and for me, I think I mentioned this earlier. I actually talk a lot about peer dialogues. I try to avoid the assessment terms and evaluation terms with students. And it's really about getting students in peer dialogues or learning dialogues where they talk about their learning. And this is where I think, again, and I really, like Irina, I tend to prefer the asynchronous environment. But I know in the classroom, that's I think it's easier in the tertiary sector than it is in the public sector for primary and secondary schooling. But ideally, you want to have in a peer evaluation, peer assessment, whatever language you're using, but what I call learning dialogues, an opportunity for students to see each other's work and ask questions of each other. We know from the research that the number one skill you can teach students is the act of questioning and asking good questions. It's also number one skill for teachers. It's been shown to have a real positive impact on achievement. So that's what you're trying to do, is create platforms and ways for students to share each other's work and ask questions about each other's work. And one of the best questions that I've taught students is, as much as as early as 5 and 6 years old, is to two questions I get them to ask, and that is when they hear about their a peer's work, I ask them, what would you do differently now yourself? So I get them to ask themselves almost a self-assessment. What if I was to do this again, I would do something different. And from the learning from what they've learned in their dialogue with the student. So again, those kinds of reflective questions is really critical. And good research on this at all age levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Don. So sure, I like when you talked about how to ask questions, you have to teach students how to ask questions. That is I think most important thing you should teach a student, because they at that stage, if they're not asking questions, they're not actually learning. And one course it reminded me of, I hit Coursera a few years back, and I found a very famous course. It's called Learning How to Learn. I just can't remember the professor's name, but I really was engaged and hooked to the course. And it actually explained, how the brain works and how to assemble the information inside your brain. And of course, there was an element about like you have to ask the right questions for you to answer. So thank you, Professor Don, for that. Professor Don, I will come back to you with this, that there are formative assessments and they are key for learner to understand their weaknesses, right? And what do you think the formative assessment look like in an online learning environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one area where we've got to really start thinking differently around what we call formative assessment. I mean, we also talk about formal and informal assessments as well. And I think in an online environment, you've got to take much greater advantage of informal assessments. You know, so this is getting past the idea of quizzes and these kinds of written types of assessments, and getting you know, students talking more about their learning. I think you can do that kind of assessment with students. And I think this is where, again, you can create, if you've got your students working in virtual groups in, you know, virtual rooms, you can actually have, you know, mini interviews with your students and just get them to talk about their learning. And that's the sort of stuff that I think you have to do a lot more of in an online environment. And again, just asking them questions and getting them to talk about it and be reflective. That's the real key here, is getting students to be reflective and to talk out loud about their learning.
Yeah, I just probably want to add a little bit on that, on my own experience with, if it's all right, Ashish.
Sure.
Yeah, because one of our experiences, we're teaching coding and technology to the kids, right? So it's a little bit it's asynchronous, but then we come together and then we talk about the problems, and then that's the chance that they get to troubleshoot. But also there's a way, like, you know, when we try to troubleshoot our computers or whatnot, there's always forums that we can look into. So this is what we've done with the kids as well. It's like, you know, if their code is not working, and there's a forum that they can, you know, put this up, and the other kids, they're quite keen to help. And this is a way of giving, you know, peer feedback, and that's, I think that's a lot more valuable than a top-down teaching. And this is like learning from each other. Then when we come together and then, you know, they have questions for us, for the technology teachers, and but rather than, you know, just giving them our thoughts, they can, you know, have a dialogue with the other students, and whether it's through the chat box, and they, you know, send each other like suggestion for, you know, troubleshooting those codes and stuff. So yeah, I think there's really value in trying to find a way, an environment to really support this kind of student interaction. I know it is quite challenging, but there are ways to go about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. Actually, it reminds me of this website called Stack Exchange. I think you were referring to that, right? Stack Exchange. It is a developers community, and whatever problem you find in your code, you will simply get your answers there. And probably someone was looking for it 5 years ago or 6 years ago. And additionally, I would also like to add something that there is a proper documentation on how to Google, how to search in Google's search engine. We generally, all of us assume that we are best searchers of Google. We can explore everything in Google, but it's not actually true, because there are certain elements, certain ways, certain keys you can use which can, you know, enhance your searches. And it can also, I think it should be taught as a curriculum to students also, to search their whatever their curiosities are. So my next question would be to Arina, and it is that the only major drawback that we observe in online teaching is lack of direct contact, of course. What additional activities to traditional learning can ensure the pastoral care of students in supportive virtual classroom culture? You are muted, Arina.
Just unmute.
Oh, goodness me, I should know this. This is great, because Marion just said before, keep it real. And that is absolutely key. But I kind of prefer to say keep it as real as you can, really, because we know it's not a real situation. But to personalize lessons, I think, is really vital in that pastoral care and creating a classroom culture as you would in a four walls classroom. It's simple things like some of my teachers that are working on programs at the moment, they're 16-week programs, and they're daily, they are engaging with their students, usually for an hour a day, or sometimes two to three if need be. But they do things like they have color themed days. The other day a teacher had a shared lunch where they changed the class time so that everyone came together and they shared their lunch together while they were engaging in the lesson. I think that sort of thing, just keeping it real, this kind of things that you would do in a classroom as people would enter a classroom and you just have that little daily chit chat with them, is to be online in your Zoom classroom, for example, 5-10 minutes before class begins, and you get those really, really important moments with individuals who know that you're going to be there, and they sneak in early just so they can have that one-to-one chat. So that's one idea. One-to-one support sessions. So opening up either in Teams or whatever platform you're using, a kind of a chat hour. So students that perhaps are not so vocal in class online might be able to come in and send you a message. They know you're always going to be there. You're always going to be responding in real time. That's really important too, I think. That sort of tutorial drop-in center kind of feel, and just that checking in, that sort of that human, that mothering, I suppose, or parenting that you tend to do with your students. That checking in, how's everyone feeling? How's it for you today? And maybe even using Zoom polls at the end of a class and just saying, where are you at, emotionally at the moment? Where are you? Because as I said in the beginning, everyone has got their own narrative, their own story. So the question, what additional activities to traditional learning? Apart from the obvious additional activities that we're trying to do online that we can't do in a classroom, I would say just create that class culture, make your lessons meaningful, make the interactions between the students meaningful, get them to engage with each other, not just teacher to student, but student to student, teacher to student, student to teacher as well. I think that's really, really vital, because at the moment there is a lot of anxiety throughout the world, and students are suffering a very changed environment, and we need to have our antenna up and be alert to that. So yeah, just human kindness.
Thank you, Rina. Thank you for that. Of course, there are some questions which I want everyone to get engaged in, like all the panelists, and I will ask them one by one. There are questions like, how do we, what are the best practices to engage the younger generation of kids? How to engage younger generation of kids? So I would like Professor Dawn to start with it first, then I'll move.
And my apologies, I lost what you said there.
What are the best practices to engage a younger generation of kids in online programs?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably not an area that I have a lot of expertise in, and I think because I haven't done a lot of online work with younger generation. I mean, I do believe, I mean, this is actually a question that comes back to something you asked earlier, and that is, how do we get students involved with more of the practical? I mean, I think one of the best ways to get students involved with the online is to give them things to do offline. and then come together online for the other things. So, I was a science teacher, and so there's a lot of things you can do in science with everyday things, and getting students to do that and to come online to tell their stories about their experiences, to take photos. And so, it might sound a little, but I see people nodding. I think sometimes the best way to get online is to get offline. So that's all I need to say on that.
Yeah, I would just like to add, if I may, to
Yeah, sure,
Don.
sure.
I think tasks away from the screen, set tasks away from the screen, come back, revisit. Simple as that. Yeah.
Your inputs, Dr. Tan?
Oh yeah, I've already said this in my kind of initial introduction that we don't always have to be digital. Like we can take things analog. Yeah, and it's not my area of expertise, young children, but I can just only speak on my nephew's behalf, who's around like age 7, and yeah, he enjoys the having, as Don says, take it offline, make them take pictures, and they come and they tell their stories. And this is a way to interact, is to, they're really happy to share, let's say for their PE, they did like yoga poses and stuff. And then they take snapshots of that, and they're quite happy to share it with their classmates. And there's a lot of laughter when, the kids share it to each other. But again, I'm speaking only from one example, but yeah. And I just resonate with Don and Irina said. It's like, you can take things offline, then come together, then have a bit more engagement there. Yeah.
Can I just add one small thing? Again, it's my niece and nephew's experience. Is that I think we are actually creating a generation of orators, because or storytellers, because those that are engaging in that kind of learning, where they are told to go off and complete a task, come back and share, are actually sharing. They've got their visual support. It's like show and tell time at primary school, but it's not as freaky, it's not as scary and terrifying, because you've got that different dimension in which you're delivering it, and everyone's in the same boat. So yeah, I fully endorse that.
I'm not sure what happened in India, but during our first lockdown in New Zealand, some of the news stations had daily family tasks for people to do, and it became a big hit as young children and families were videotaping and doing small little slideshows of their events, and they were showing on the television, and it was a big hit. And so I think that sort of highlights the same thing. So it is that kind of work, and there's so many different ways of, you talk about orders. I actually think it's more than that. I think there's different ways of showing what we've learned and what we think about. So it's not just telling it. I think we can show it with different kind of video technologies. Incredible now. There's just so many different ways of demonstrating things we've learned. I mean, you talked about the videos earlier. I mean, Carl Sagan and some of those were, got me thinking about this world as well, and how we present. My first degree way back in, I'm older than all of you, I think, in 80. Well, my second degree in 84 was on media and technology and education. How do we use that to help learning? So, there's just so much more that we can do.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I just want to acknowledge what Rohini from the participants said. Maybe it's not about just speaking. Maybe some younger kids might find that harder, but they can always express ways. Maybe they're better at writing. There's ways for them to, different platforms for them to share their stories. So yeah, that's and I just thinking about your nephew and nieces, Irina, I was just thinking, yes, this is a totally different generation now, where they're learning through Zoom, and it boggles my mind of their development in this kind of environment. But there's ways to enhance that. Yeah.
In my case also, my younger nephews and nieces, they made me a more humble teacher. they they asked questions which I never thought I would be asked someday, and I really had to introspect that what I understand about physics, what I understand about these topics I claim to teach students. So that was a common feeling. I think feelings will be mutual here. So my next question would be to Arina, and I think this will be our last question, and then we'll open for Q&A session. Uh, Arina, how can a teacher help a student to ensure effective time management and self-discipline while they're studying online? What is the teacher's role here?
Oh goodness. What I think works is, of course, everyone's an individual and they have their own agendas and they have their own ways of working and extrinsic motivation, extrinsic, intrinsic, whatever. But I think what works really, really well is collectively as a class, make time frames. Go, okay, so you've got a writing task to do. It would be great if we could do this by the end of the week, but how long do you think that you need? All of you go into your breakout rooms, have a chat about it. What would your time frame be for your group, or what would your time frame be for this particular task? And kind of as a family, as a collective, make those decisions on time management. So it's not the teacher imposing on them, you must have your homework done by blah, 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 or you know, it's got to be 150 words or else, for example, for a writing assessment. But I think that approach, because we all have to be so much more flexible in this new paradigm, we can't impose upon people the timelines that we used to impose when we knew that they were coming to school every day, coming to university, wherever. They were going back to their home, their homestay, their accommodation, whatever. It's a very different situation. We don't know what their living situations are necessarily. We don't know if they can only access a device for a certain period of time during a day, because there might be 4 children sharing a device in one family, for example. So I think there has to be a huge element of flexibility around time management. But at the same time, it's still a critical skill to teach and to have in place in your virtual classroom. That seems to work. Yeah, giving them the autonomy and giving them the accountability.
Ownership. So let's start the question and answer sessions with our panelists, and I think Kshitij would take over.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Arina, Marion, and Dawn. And I'm sure that your insights and your feedback, and based on your experiences, would have really helped teachers who are in a very similar setup over here in India. And we wanted to have this panel discussion to make sure that we are able to share the best practices that are being followed in India and in New Zealand at the same time. And I would like to welcome all the teachers now. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box, and our distinguished panelists will be more than happy to answer these questions. If you want to ask your question live, please raise your hands, and we'll be more than happy to unmute you so that you can ask and direct your questions towards the panelists. I've got Ms. Vijay Lakshmi over here, so I'll give her the approval to talk. Hello, Ms. Vijay Lakshmi.
You can unmute yourself, Vijay Lakshmi, if you're speaking.
Okay, while we wait for Ms. Vijay Lakshmi to ask a question, we have a question over here in the chat window from Rohini, which says, what kind of differentiation strategies can be applied in online classes to cater to students having varied learning needs? Can I ask one of the panelists to please answer this question for Rohini? Ms. Arena, would you like to take this question? What kind of differentiation strategies can be applied in online classes to cater to students having varied learning needs?
Okay, I'm just trying to get my head around the actual question. I'm assuming that you are talking about, Rohini, you're talking about levels of learning or specific learning types. Okay, yes, thank you. So I think that if you have different levels of students in reading as well as learning types. Okay, so if you've got different levels of reading ability in your class, I think this is where the breakout rooms are absolutely golden. To be able to actually put specific students into specific rooms and work on a reading program together, and then you enter, assist and leave, give them a task, come back, and so on. That is really valuable. But it's also, it is possible within a Zoom situation, because I'm assuming this is what we're talking about, to set reading tasks at different levels. So you might have a classroom of 20 students, I don't know the numbers, but say 20 for ease of mathematics. And you have 4 different levels. You've got 5 students in each level of reading. And you might put one of those students from each of the levels in a group, so they're scaffolding one another, and give them a task around a particular text type, or use text types that are like Reading Lab, where they have different levels of reading text of the same text. So the higher level student would be able to inject a lot more information than the lower level student, but they would still be able to engage with that text. Learning types, well, this is where, I mean, if there's a kinesthetic learners in your group that like to get up and move around, do it. Stop the class after 10 minutes. Get everybody to do some calisthenics, some exercise, get back to learning again. I mean, there are so many ways that we can keep the same flow that we would do in a classroom, in a virtual classroom. We just have to think really tangentially and figure how to do that differently. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Arena. Swati, we have put you on the panel if you want to ask your question and unmute yourself. And while she's preparing her question, we have a question over here from Ms. Chandravali, who says, how can we indulge students who are less communicative or introvert for virtual learning? Dawn, would you like to take this one?
Yes, and I think that's exactly, I mean, I think this is where the online learning environment is actually ideal. It's where I first started to be, as I said in my intro, I had students that felt this was the best way for them to actually engage in their learning, because they were introverted and they were slower to respond. And what happens in many classrooms, are more gregarious students jump into the forefront and ask their questions or demand attention quicker than others. And so I think the online environment, if you're asynchronous, especially, and you give chances to students to come back, it is a better forum for them to ask their questions. And there's actually, I mean, I'm not always a fan of anonymity, but I think you can provide some anonymity for students that ask those kinds of questions too, that are, they don't want to look stupid, quote unquote, and ask a question that's silly. So I think you can play, depending on the culture you've created in your classroom. I think early on you've got to provide those forums for students to know, to say what they don't know yet. So yeah.
Thank you, Dawn. We have another question in the chat window, and this is from Miss Preeti, who says that I'm really keen on knowing how hearing disabled children are catered to in online platforms. I experience them having difficulty in understanding things online. Marion, would you like to talk how technology can help in this area when it comes to virtual learning?
Thank you. Yeah, it is not my area of expertise, disabilities, but Yeah, I guess in a classroom environment, especially here at Massey University, what we do is we provide not only the online platform, the synchronous, but you already provide kind of the materials beforehand. And maybe this is the chance where you can have one-on-one sessions with the students that have hearing disability. If they, because like for example, in this environment, it's very quite hard to interact because we're using really words. There's no automatic transcriptions and stuff. Yeah, so this is on top of my head is just thinking, making sure that the materials are available to them beforehand, and if needed, just really going that extra mile of having one-on-one sessions where you can have cater to their needs. In terms of like technologies, there's definitely different kind of assistive technologies. I'm not just saying in the classroom environment, but for example, when we communicate warnings, especially for the hearing disabilities, there's assistive communication that could help transform or communicate information. But yeah, I don't know if this is like the appropriate platform for teaching, but definitely it's, but again, comes back to the question of access and so on, which is, a kind of a bigger issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria.
Just to add to that, I think there are, just to add to that, I think there are, it is a challenge for many of the students and blind and deaf students. I mean, fortunately, this is where technology can help us, because there's some great technology out there that can do word to text translation quickly. So that's coming out there. It's just being able to access. So if you do have a deaf student in your classroom, it's worth checking with somebody that has expertise and or knows the software that you have access to.
Thank you, Don. I was just about to ask you to add if you have any, feedback on the same question. Reena, would you like to add something based on your experience teaching online?
I just from one experience, we had a profoundly deaf student, but we were fortunate enough for him to have access to his own personal signer, deaf sign language assistant. So she would join the classes as well. So she was like an additional student in the class, and he of course was focused on her, but so was the rest of the class. But the beautiful thing that actually happened was, I mean, our first thoughts were, my goodness, they are going to be that signer is going to be such a distraction for the remainder of the class. But in fact, what they were doing was they were learning double language. They were learning English alongside deaf sign language, which was lovely. And so they were then ultimately more able to engage with their classmate, because they learned simple little signs that they could then use. So as did the teacher. So there's a positive spin on that too.
Thank you.
Yeah, signers are great if you have access to them. They're fantastic. I've worked with them in different contexts. They're really skilled.
Yeah. It's all funding though, isn't it?
Yes.
Got another question from Ms. Ritika, and she says, how can we engage students more in online classes in a more enthusiastic manner? And I'm sure we will have a feedback from all three of you, considering your experience in this. Would you like to start with that, Reena and Don?
Be enthusiastic yourself.
Yeah.
Be passionate and try and exude that passion across. Yeah, motivate.
Yeah, and I think it's even what Ashish said in the very beginning, and that is, don't use the online learning environment to deliver content in a lecture type format. It's really about, nowadays, and this is stuff we were talking about, like I said, go back in the 80s and that, about changing the way we're learning. And that is, content's easy to get. It's really about what it means and how to work with it and engage with it. I think that's what we have to spend more time doing. And if anything, I think the online environment probably, it may have helped us. I'm interested to know what's going to happen after COVID when we go back to the classroom. I'm hoping that teachers will think differently around their classroom teaching as well, be more that way, to get the students much more focused on doing things in their own time and just ways of interacting differently. And I think that's the way to be more engaging.
I think too, there's a greater intimacy. It's kind of perverse, really, but there is a greater intimacy in what we're doing now. And little things like, you know, okay, everybody share, what did you eat for breakfast? Or what, something as simple as that, you know, just, you wouldn't really necessarily say that in a classroom situation, but because you've got these people appearing one by one, by one, by one, by one, by one, by one, and you want to create that cohesive culture in the classroom right away, because you've only got a set period of time to deliver content, but you also want to make it meaningful and engaging and everyone to feel like they are a community. I think that I don't know how much research has been done on this, but there seems to be a deeper intimacy in delivering online, I think.
There's certainly will be a lot more research coming forward.
Yeah, it's going to be quite interesting what we find out from this period of the pandemic. But I think I kind of resonate a little bit on the enthusiasm, because it's not the students also have this kind of control to just mute themselves, turn off their videos and not engage throughout the entire session. So they have this question like, are they engaging? And I guess this is what I was kind of saying, like the double edge of technology, because they can shut off, and how do we address that? I don't and I guess this is where, like Arena said, like, you know, make sure that there are points in your, if it's a synchronous online session, to, you know, ask questions. It doesn't have to be a top down, or like, it doesn't have to be about the lesson. It could be asking them what they had for breakfast, what they had for lunch, and just taking cues when you can, you know, insert this in your session so that it becomes more engaging. It's not just talking to a black box. But yeah, it is a challenge. And I think if we work with empathy, is to understand that yes, students will be distracted. They'll be looking at their phones, their environment around them that is out of their control, and just having that empathy that this can happen, and not being, you know, embracing it and accounting for in your lesson as well. And just one thing for me though is like make sure you take breaks, especially on synchronous sessions, is to, you know, just don't go all hard on and finish the entire hour, but, you know, take an appropriate break, you know, ask non-related to the lesson questions, and, you know, and like as you says, be as real as you can, and put in some kind of human aspect to make it more, you know, engaging. Yeah.
Thank
Can I
you.
just
I think
say-
something,
Sorry, please. So
I was just going to say, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Nisar, I was just saying ki you can add your point. I will add my point.
I was just
later,
going, I was just going to say, you know, I think one of the things about the challenge, and this is where I think teachers have done a great job on this, but it's going to be hard to maintain. And that is, you know, something Irina said earlier, you're almost on the job 24/7 nowadays. And I think that's a real challenge for teachers, how to, you know, that intimacy we're talking about, which I fully agree with you. It's created, and we saw this early on in our research, you know, in the, you know, mid 2000s or 2010, online learning meant a lot more teacher time in terms of being returning and getting feedback. So, you know, so not just being engaging for students, but how do you find time for yourself so that you'd also, you know, so I think that's just adding on to this intimacy piece. I think it is hard because it's a tough job now. You're on all the time at times. You got to find time.
Especially if you're working across time zones, it's you know, the
Naturally.
expectation is that you are there 24/7. Can I just say a very quick thing about Zoom protocol? And I think, Marion, you mentioned, you know, you don't know if they switch off their camera, or, you know, they're suddenly not engaging. You don't know if they're there or not. we found after a couple of pilot trials that we did back in 2018 that we had to put some Zoom protocols in place and actually get students to sign that they would adhere to those Zoom protocols. And there were simple things like, don't wear your pajamas and, you're in the classroom, you're not in bed, so that really, really, really made a difference. And video on, and if video's off, you're absent, so not tough, but gentle tough, and saying, this is a classroom, and the expectation is that you will arrive on time, you will, do the work, you will be there as you would in a physical classroom. So I think there is some merit in early on establishing protocols, or even getting the students themselves to write what protocols they want for their own class.
Yeah, so to adding to Professor Don's point, he was actually wondering about what would happen in future with these tools and our exposure to them. I think there is one key point I used to think about, that YouTube and Twitch and all these platforms, they have actually exploded in past 20 years. And the sheer amount of content that they have is tremendous. So what I was thinking, that in future, what will happen is that it will not matter what content you have. It will matter what kind of curation strategy you are employing. The more important aspect of engaging a student would be to curate the right content at the right time, not to just create the content, because every kind of content is already created or being created right now. Even I, as a teacher, when I used to get stuck somewhere, I used to go to YouTube or Google, and I used to find out that loophole. So I think that is something that we are going to look forward to in future. What are your inputs, Professor Don, on this?
Thank you, Ashish. We'll take up the last question over here, which is again from Ritika, and it says, this is following up from what Dr. Marion was talking about, and we have been discussing. In an online classes, the problem is that the teachers have to face that students do not switch on their cameras for positive interaction. What can be done in this case?
I guess I can give an example for some of the classes that we're doing. So this is a little bit different because it's higher education environment, but because we're doing teaching virtually at Massey University, and a lot of our students are also international, and we've started teaching offshore. So we have like Chinese students who just, they're a little bit more timid, a little bit more kind of, they won't ask questions during the class. And I guess this is where, it is a relationship. So at the beginning of the year, there were hardly any interaction, but then you kind of create this relationship that, yes, this is a safe kind of place that they can ask questions, and you can take it offline in our forums, then they can start discussion. And one of the feedback was like, they need time to think about their questions. And so maybe it won't happen now, but maybe it in the future, so it is a relationship. And I guess this is, it's not going to be instantaneous that on the first day of class, everyone's engaging. And it takes time to build up. So for us, because we were team teaching this, at the beginning, there was hardly any interaction, but we made that effort to have that relationship, whether it's, one-on-one or in the forum. And then eventually we start to see that they become more open to ask questions during class or when we are together. And then eventually, they come out of their shells. And not everybody, it might be not everybody's cup of tea. And then this goes back again to that first point that Ashish says, is the empathy. And it's relationships in the end. And that's only from the experience that I've had regarding, students turned off camera, no interaction. It takes effort, and this is really the challenge in our classroom environment. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Marion. I think that was the last question, considering all our panelists are joining from New Zealand, and it is moving towards the late evening over there. And especially, I would like to thank you for giving us your time on a weekend. Uh, I would just ask all our panelists to share their closing words before we sign off. And I would like to thank all the teachers who have been really good listeners and they have asked certain really good questions. And I'm sure our motive behind doing this panel discussion was that we can share some best practices that are being followed by the industry. And I hope that that knowledge sharing did happen during this panel discussion. Starting with you, Professor Don, your closing words, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'll start just by I'm not sure there's an answer to what best practices are. I think this is, we're all learning this right now in a very different way. We've certainly had things we've learned from the past, and we're going to have lots more to learn from the future. And the last question there that I responded to on text was just, we've got issues of access for children and learners. And so what does that mean going forward? So I'm hoping that, as we learn from all this and bring this to the classroom going forward, and I think that's where I'm hoping we go, is that some of our learning, it just changes the way we think about teaching in our classrooms.
Thank you, Professor Don. Moving on to Ms. Arena.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that we have to acknowledge, and we do, that it's not the same. And that we need to really help our students to reduce their anxiety around what's happening in the world, what's happening with their education as well. And one way to do that is by really structuring those virtual online lessons so that there is kind of comfort in knowing that they're going to come into a classroom, there's going to be a warmer activity, there's going to be a learning point discussion, there's going to be a task, they'll go into a group, they'll come back, they'll give feedback, there'll be another learning point, and then there'll be a whole class task, then there'll be some sort of conclusion, wind up, some Q&A or a poll or something, a spot quiz, something around that, so that there is a structure to their days. So I think reducing anxiety in our learners and ourselves too, is really, really vital.
Thank you, Ms. Arena. Passing on to you, Mariam.
Oh, thank you. And I guess my parting words is just really to thank everyone for what we call here in New Zealand mahi. So thank you for your mahi. And mahi is really not just work. It translates to work. It's not just about the output, but your work, your being into that work. Because as educators and teachers, you put yourself so much into it, and really thank you for your mahi. And I hope that you can also translate this to thanking your students for their mahi, for them being learners, for them being their students. And I think, I think the emphasis here is the relationships that we build with their students. It's not just about the outputs, but the relationships that we build and the being of our learners and our teachers. So once again, thank you everyone for your mahi.
Thank you, Marian. Ashish, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, I would like to keep it very brief. For example, for entrepreneurs, it's advised that whoever they hire, there should be an entrepreneurial spirit in them also. That is what will drive them to work. Similarly, I think in teaching, it is relevant to imbibe the spirit of teaching into students. They will help their peers. They will help you also sometimes to ask the right question by asking the right questions. And the practice of letting them have their thoughts and letting them explain their thoughts to others will go a long way. So these are my 2 cents on this topic.
Thank you, Ashish. Once again, a big thank you to all the panelists who have been such wonderful guests for us today. I mean, I didn't even realize that we have almost finished 90 minutes of this conversation, and time just flew by. And I'm
Yes, certainly.
Really good messages coming from our attendees as well, who are thanking all the panelists left, right, and center for all the insights that you have shared. So I believe this has been a very interactive session, and I'm sure all of us are parting for some better interactions in the future. And we are going with a lot of knowledge that will help our young minds, and it will help us become better learners while we learn how to make our students learn. I would like to once again thank all the teachers for all the wonderful work that you are doing. We always talk about the frontliners who are helping us, tackle the COVID, but I think you are one of our frontliners as well, who's making sure that our young minds don't fall back and their learning never stops. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for a wonderful afternoon in India and a wonderful evening in New Zealand. And we hope to have many such sessions in the future as well.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Kshitij.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.